Wholeness, welcome. Today I have James Robbins with me. James, what's going on?
Josh, good to be here. Thanks for having me on your show.
Oh, well, thanks for joining. The classic question I go with, who is James? What kind of work does he do?
James was raised on a small cattle ranch in the foothills of the Rockies as a shy, introverted redhead, but he went on to uh, create a company that teaches leaders how to lead better, and also not just with leadership skills, but how to really bring the best of yourself to the world.
So what got you interested in leadership? Why leadership? Yeah.
Yeah, I my original plan in life, I was going to become a film director, and then as life can throw you a curveball, I ended up going into ministry, Christian ministry, which was not even on my top 100 possibilities of things I might do with my life. But I did it because I enjoyed helping people, and I love that. But over time, and I started having kids, I was like, I need to make more money than I'm making now. And I met this guy who was a speaker, and he would speak at these conferences and get paid more in one speech than I did all month. And I was doing like, 7, 8 speeches in ministry. And so I thought I could do that, but I was like, what should I talk about? And I thought of John Maxwell, who had been a preacher and then started teaching leadership. And I thought, well, I teach leadership in the not-for-profit. Why don't I do that? So that was the segue. The motivation wasn't, let me change the world in terms of helping leaders get better. It initially started like, hey, I just need to make more money so I can make sure I'm taking care of my kids. But that ended up turning into a career, and I really focused on it and became good at what I was doing. And so, yeah, that's how I started teaching leadership.
So I guess why we're on this topic of leadership, just kind of start maybe from the ground level here. What kind of issues do you see with leaders today, and blocks? And then what do you think leaders are doing okay? And then what kind of skill set do you like uniquely bring to to these areas?
Well, definitely in terms of leadership, the class has gotten smarter, right? Decade by decade, right? We're doing better than we were, 2 decades ago. But the biggest challenge that leaders face is that, well, it's sort of like the same challenge that Eastern Airlines had back in 1970s when they were coming into Miami to land at night, and one of the light bulbs didn't come on to confirm that the landing gear was down. So the two pilots began trying to change this light bulb. And what they think happened was that the pilot's knee hit the console and it turned off the autopilot. So no one was flying the plane. And meanwhile, they're fiddling with this light and they finally get it out and looked at it. It looked fine. They go to stick it back in and it's jammed again. But meanwhile, the plane is continuing to descend down to like 1,000 feet, 800 feet, 500 feet. And it gets to 500 and there's an alarm that goes off that they hear this every time they land, just says, hey, you're at 500. Now it's dark. They're over the Everglades. Still, though, right in front of their faces, there's an altimeter, but no one's paying attention because they're trying to solve this problem. Well, they get to 200 feet and finally Tower radios them and says, hey, Eastern, like everything okay? And they're like, yeah, well, uh, we're at 2000, right? And the last thing recorded on the black box was, hey, what happened to our altitude? As they realized what had happened. And I share that because it's a similar thing that happens to leaders today is that they get so busy in task work, like changing light bulbs, that they neglect the people work. And it's the people work that actually is what produces the results, right? So a leader's real task is helping your people be as successful as you need them to be. At the same time, you got to change 100 light bulbs. And are they important? Yes, they are, but you can't lose the people work. So that's the biggest challenge that managers are facing, leaders are facing.
The uh, the the other thing, it sounds like communication. If we're going to maybe use a metaphor and use it literally here, why weren't they more? Why wasn't the control tower in more communication with them? Why did they get distracted? Why did they think this one thing was so important and then forgetting? I talk about mindfulness, right? And remember how do they get off course and remember the most important thing? There's an old Zen saying, the most important thing is to remember the most important thing. So I think the communication aspect here is important. And why don't you elaborate what you mean by people work too, to expound on that a little?
For sure. And by the way, yeah, that story is still taught in aviation schools today. That was also a question, like what in the world was Tower doing and why did they not, radio earlier? But part of this is biology. Like our brain, when we're trying to solve a problem and add in a little bit of stress, we get this spotlight effect, which makes us great at solving the problem. But if that, most problems don't exist in a vacuum. And so what's the other thing? And for aviators, it's always fly the plane, right? That's the thing. So for leaders, it's lead your people. And anyone who has been a leader or a manager or runs their own business with staff, you'll know what I mean when I say, sometimes it's like I hope my staff doesn't find me today so I can just get stuff done. But the people work is all about how do I unlock potential in my staff? How do I help them raise their level? And it's going to come down to honestly, some basic things. I care about them. I'm helping them grow. I'm appreciating the work that they're doing. I'm giving them feedback on their progress because that's an important human need. I'm helping them realize something significant about what they do so they can link it to purpose. And I'm not micromanaging them. I'm letting them have autonomy so they can invest more themselves. So that's people work, right? The task work is okay, what do we got to get done? What's on the to do list? Who's doing what? The people work is that little conversation on Friday. Hey, what are your plans for the weekend? And then on Monday, remembering to, hey, did you guys go on that hike? How was it? Oh, fantastic. Hey, how was your son Joey's soccer tournament on the weekend? That's people work. It's those little moments that we increase the trust, we increase the reciprocity. There's a lot of good things that go on there.
What's coming up now around that too is authenticity and how important that can be, at least for some, right? So I'm thinking, and then the purpose as well. So I'm wondering, yeah, how important that is, because instead of just treating it, the people work like another task on the to-do list, right? That, in order to be successful, I need to do this. So where, I mean, on the extreme end, you have like a psychopathy where people can play the game really well, but they just have no empathy whatsoever. But then you have people, I guess, on the other extreme where they're just get too emotionally involved, maybe too bleeding heart, where they can't, they get, yeah, where they can't do the other things they need to do. So the balance on this, and I think the authenticity is really important when it comes to that. And then purpose. I was looking at your website beforehand, and you talk about how important purpose is. And the other thing around purpose, I'm wondering that people, because it's been so long since I've been in the corporate world, but like that aren't maybe a good fit, and how you teach leaders to deal with people that aren't a good fit, and then how kind of maybe to refresh and inspire interest when it's just that maybe that's all it is. Maybe they just a slight um, unalignment or out of alignment. Yeah.
For sure. Well, I want to go back to what you said about authenticity. So that's so important. And the challenge for a lot of leaders, especially when they first come into leadership. So in your first, 5, 6 years as a leader, a lot of times your only reference for what is a leader is the bosses you've had before you. And so it depends on who they were. So my first couple of bosses in life were either absent or super like driving and not people at all, or like no excuses, you didn't get it done, like very binary. So my initial thing was, okay, that's what a leader is, but that's not who I am. So it took a while for me to understand, oh, there's different styles of leadership. Like I'm more of a coaching leader or a servant leader. And to give yourself permission that it's okay to actually be yourself. Because at the end of the day, leadership is about producing results, right? You're doing it with people, but whether you're a not for profit or whether you're a Fortune 100, you've got to produce results. And so, what's going to do that? At the end of the day, like I said, it's going to be about unlocking the potential of your people. Because when you think about it, every one of us, and even for those of you listening, if you think of your own life, there's an incredible gap between you at your best and you at your, let's say, mediocre or not so great, right? Even business owners, right? Some days we can come in and just be crushing it, other days we're not. Well, that gap, that's part of what we tweak as leaders. Because if I can take my team, let's say you have a team of 10, and I get them all just 10% more engaged, well, that's like I just added an employee that I don't have to pay for or train. So you have to think about it in that way. In terms of the comment about how do you know when someone's not a good fit or not, in the corporate world, here's what I see. A lot of people will say, well, I don't think this person's a good fit, or they're just not a motivated person. And sometimes managers say that because they're just frustrated because they don't know how to get through, right? They don't know how to motivate the person. So, obviously that's one of the things that we help them with to figure that out. But there are times, of course, where somebody's not a fit, but that becomes obvious usually to all, right? Where it's either outside of their capacity or it's outside of their passion range, right? Where they're not passionate about this at all. They don't care. They don't want to give their heart. And sometimes we serve them by just saying, hey, you know what? It's time for you probably to do something else, because a lot of times people are afraid to make a change. And so sometimes that's a servant leader right there when you say, hey, I'm going to help you make this change so you can get on with your life. And I've had to do that before. I had to let a guy go who was amazing, but I knew that like this wasn't where his future was. And I said, hey, you got to go. And he took it hard, but then, he went on and now he's in the FBI. So I would say he's doing pretty well.
Well, right on. Thank you for that. Now I know you do stories and narratives too, and you're a big climber, right? Or you do trail running. Tell me how your kind of personal interest, how you leverage these and storytelling to help some of the things we've already been talking about.
Storytelling is just the most powerful way that we communicate. Obviously, we do it all the time. Everyone here does it all day. Like I said, I grew up in the foothills of the Rocky Mountains. So the mountains also were always a part of my story, right? Growing up, my father would take me fishing and things like that. I used to do scrambling on peaks, near where I lived, but nothing hardcore. I'm afraid of heights. So that keeps me from doing some of these big mountains. But in 2008, maybe, I signed up for an expedition down in Bolivia. And, it was just one of these professionally guided climbs that I'd met the guy who ran the company, and I would go visit him at his house, and he would say, hey, we're going to Mount Elbrus in Russia. Why don't you come with us? And I'd be like, oh, I'd love to. I'd love to, but I can't. And then, a couple months later, I'd go visit him again. He's like, hey, we're going to go to Kilimanjaro. Why don't you come? And I was like, oh, I'd love to, but I can't. I just kept saying I can't all the time. And finally, one day, he's like, hey, we're going to Bolivia. We're going to climb the highest peak in the country. And he's like, why don't you come? And I was like, oh, I'd love to. And then I just thought, what am I like? I'm never going to go. Like, I'm never going to go. And so I'd left his house. I was driving home, and then I was like, no, I'm doing it. So I called him back. I'm like, all right, how much is the deposit? Okay, here's my credit card. So with that, you're never really committed until you pay something, right? So whether it's money or it's time or something. But I went on this expedition to Bolivia, and it was a great experience. The story of that, and here's what's interesting. So back to the stories. I came back from that trip, and a friend of mine said, hey, why don't you come out? I've got a men's group, a men's conference, and you could just tell the story of what happened in Bolivia. And I was like, well, sure, I guess. I mean, I don't know that there's much of a story, but I'll see. And I didn't even realize it at the time. And I'm like a storyteller, but I was just sitting on this gold mine of stories. And so as I then thought through it, I was like, oh, actually, there's a lot here. And that's one of my signature stories when I'm speaking on stages. I tell this story. Everybody loves it. They get so much out of it. So when it comes to stories and mountains, that's how that goes for me. But all of us, we have all these moments in our life that we think, well, I don't think there's anything to tell here. And then when you actually start to look into it, you realize there's universal principles, because most stories are you wanted something, there's something you're trying to get, and something's in the way. And everyone can relate with that. So stories connect us, right? People live through our stories, becomes their story. But at the end of the day, whatever the point of the story, what I call the Trojan horse, whatever the point of the story is, that's how we communicate that across. Because if you think about it in this way, it's really wild. I could get up on stage, let's say, one of my keynotes, the main point is that, um, leadership isn't easy, but it doesn't have to be complicated. It's really doing the little things consistently. That's kind of like the point of the talk. But I could save everybody 50 minutes and just get up and say that sentence. But it doesn't have the same teeth, right? Because it's not wrapped in something digestible. It's got to get in the body. It's like a medication. And the story is the thing that wraps it. And that is what creates transformation.
Yeah, I really appreciate that. And I know how powerful the stories and narratives are, yet I kind of struggle to, I think, have these relatable stories to tell people and ones that land right. Um, I know the connection I have here is just a little bit off, but I guess next I was going to ask you maybe for some, if you have any storytelling tips or like any guidance around crafting narratives or, I mean, this is kind of an inbuilt, it seems like for some, it's just a natural thing and we do it, people just do it naturally and it comes without any kind of, oh, I don't know. I guess people do plan a lot and craft their story and hone it over and over again. And then how it's different written from spoken. I guess some general advice on storytelling and how it relates to leadership too. Anything else you can say about it?
So when it comes to storytelling techniques, a lot of people mess up their stories because they just try to tell too much and they give too much details. So, for example, I mentioned to you before we got on air that I broke my ankle on Saturday morning trail running. So there's a story in that. Like I haven't figured out, how I would use that story, but there's a story in that. But basically, it was a friend of mine and we were running on this trail on a mountain in the dark under headlamps, and I broke my ankle. But when people would go to tell that story, at first they would want to say, well, the reason I was on that mountain is because I am looking for new trail routes for the trail running group that I'm a part of. And like all this stuff that you don't need that in the story. That's not what's important. Stories all begin with a really simple context. You can think of it like at the opening scene, whatever that is, and it's usually just like time, place, and person. Like, hey, my buddy and I we're trail running on a mountain in the dark under headlamps. That's all you need to know right at the beginning, and then most stories are going to have what we would call an inciting incident, and that is that moment where the story changes. Like, okay, so yeah, we're running, and then I'm going to tell how I wanted to get some video to show some friends. And so I started running with my phone while I'm looking at the screen and I didn't pay attention and then crack, right? So that becomes the inciting incident. Now, what that creates the new goal. The new goal is like, I need to get back down this mountain on a broken ankle and I don't have that much time to do it. So then that becomes the story. And however I would develop that, I would add in some tension, some extra rising stakes, whatever that might be. It could be like I knew I can't keep walking on this too much longer, but there's going to be some kind of climax and then some sort of lesson in it. So you take this event that some people would want to tell you that over 30 minutes at the pub, that you really can tell that story in probably 3 minutes. Now, again, it's going to be context dependent. If I'm in a keynote on stage, I might tease that out a little bit, depending on how important the point is that I'm making, or it might get reduced to be sort of like an analogy as well. I mean, but the other thing about stories is remember that they're so versatile. They are like the Swiss Army knife. Like they are a multi-tool. So even that story of breaking my ankle on this trail, right? Well, what's that? Could that story be about? because it's not really just about me breaking my ankle on the trail. I mean, that could be about technology and how we're always looking at our phones and what's the price of that. It could be about the importance of having companionship, right? And the guy that stuck with me and helped me get to the bottom. It could be a story about, you know, pushing yourself and doing things that are difficult, even if there's risk involved. And yeah, sometimes it doesn't go your way. That's the great thing about stories, is that they're just this multi-tool. And I've used the same story sometimes to make like three different completely separate points on stage, and it fits, it flows. It's just, what data points are we going to pull out and make that's what the story is about. And then that's what the audience remembers. Oh, James was on stage. He told the story about breaking his ankle on the trail because he was looking at his phone. And then he went on to talk and shared some statistics about how much we look at our phones, and babies are impacted because their mothers are not giving eye contact. And like, so they remember all that, but it started because I'm looking at my phone and I break my ankle. So you keep
Cool.
things tight. You don't need to overstuff. Don't be like the uncle at the family reunion that's like, well, before I tell you this, I got to tell you the backstory. No, we don't need the backstory.
Well, I appreciate you sharing that. And not cool on you breaking your ankle, but these are really some good pointers on how to get to leverage this. So now I want to ask, since you're a public speaker, and I want to pick your brain a little bit on what kind of tips and advice you have just in general for speaking in general. Whatever comes to mind, whatever comes up here. I know with me, I haven't practiced enough. My thing is the ums and the ahs, and needing to replace them with silences, and the space between words, how powerful that is. And, likening it to a musician, where different musicians can play the exact same thing, but the ones that do the spacing, it makes a lot of difference. But that's just one little thing about amongst so many different points and challenges with public speaking. So yeah, what do you advise, or what kind of tips and recommendations do you have in general, and then anything specific too?
Well, you bring up a great point about the, let's say, ums and ahs. So right, it's a common thing that people come up with. But I bet if you're hanging out with your friends and they're like, "Hey, what'd you do last weekend?" and you start telling them the story of how you broke your ankle, I bet you don't have ums and ahs in there. Am I right?
Probably not, because I think that one of the reasons they say is because you're kind of buying time. You're thinking about what to say next. And so that fills in the gaps to get the next thing formulated or whatever. So maybe there's something to that. But
Yeah,
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 exactly.
you're
Right.
right. With the buddies, there's no pressure, not really performance. You can let your guard down and just be however you are too. And it's not like a formal setting, right?
Yeah. And so the reason I ask you that is because that's not a speaking technique thing, that's a mindset thing. And so when we want to work on that, it's not so much like, okay, I got to make sure I'm not doing that. No, the solution to that is actually making sure that you are coming and really being present into your talk, and not worrying about what people are going to think and is this going to be good enough. And so, of course, there's a lot of things that are going to help get you to that point, right? So, one is going to be preparation, two is going to be some mindset work, but three is really focused on, I am here to serve these people. And one thing I still do, and I've done almost 3,000 presentations, but when I go and I'm waiting at the front or backstage or wherever, I will look out at the audience and I'll just take a moment and I'll try to put myself in their shoes for a moment, and I will try to feel empathy. Because, so let's say I'm at a big HR conference and I'll look out at this room and I'll think, because I know HR pretty well, and I'll think, you know what? These people work hard. They have a difficult job. No one's ever happy with them. They've got some time off to come to this conference. They've come to my session. I want to really serve these people. And just by turning the spotlight off of myself, that I'm like, oh, I hope this is okay, and I hope I remember this point, and I get it back onto them. And then the other part to that is trusting yourself, right? So if you have prepared, not memorized, but if you have prepared, like, this is my message. It's not like this is my talk and the points I want to make. No, this is my message. Even if you veer off your own script a little bit, not a big deal because you know the message that you're trying to get across. So that would be one thing I'd say is like really be clear about what's the message at the end of the day. If they only hear one thing, what is that? Okay, make sure they're going to hear that. But get into that place of empathy, get into um, and be prepared enough so that you are not like, oh no, what do I need to say next? And trust me, I've spent so many hours on stage, sweating bullets, being in my head, thinking this sucks, I'm losing the audience, like all these insecure moments. And but you just keep going, and you get better and better as you go.
So then context, right? So that's one thing. And, I guess a lot of people don't really have that experience. I've only had that a few times, right? And I can totally agree. Yes, the more prepared, the better for something like that. Now, when we're talking about something kind of more abstract, like podcasting here, right? Where we're not in front of a live audience where we can get feedback or that kind of have this different energy, I think, too, maybe. Um, yeah, how might it differ from what have you learned from you're a podcaster too? What have you learned as far as differences and if that kind of still, how much of that still applies and how much doesn't? And I guess it depends on people's style and how they do things too with podcasting as well. Yeah.
So there's going to be some similarities and there's going to be some differences. And the similarities are it still comes down to being present in the moment, like not in your head, but in the conversation, and trusting yourself so that you're not going to give into insecurities. But there's still some skills to layer on top of that. And so, to give you the podcasting example, when I started my podcast and I started having guests on, and Olympic athletes or whoever, Navy SEALs, and what I noticed was, wow, I'm really nervous. Like, this is, even though I'm a communicator for my living, I asked this guy a question, but I didn't even listen to his answer because I'm sweating bullets on what's the next question. And then I asked that question, and then I'm thinking that was a stupid question. And then I don't hear his answer again. Right. So that's the process. And I'm like, okay, so I need to grow in this interviewing skill thing. But it's the same thing in my chair right now as the interviewee, is I realized, when my last book had come out and we started doing podcasts, I thought, this is a skill I have not yet developed, which is okay. It just means, all right, just you got to put in the reps and be intentional. And I think this is where we get down to intentional practice. Like if you really want to master something. So early on in my speaking career, because I had so many insecurities, every speech I would go in, I would have one goal. What's my one goal this time? It's to make sure I make more eye contact with the audience. All right, that's my one goal. But after I get on the plane, I'm going home. Hey, what went well? What are you going to do different or more of, less of next time? And I just kept doing that. So I do the same thing with podcasts. If I'm interviewing someone or if I'm on a show, hey, what went well? What would I like to do differently next time? I don't really like how I answered that question. I think I could have answered that better. I think that's the skill part that we practice. But it doesn't replace the inner core of, I'm going to be here, I'm going to be present, I'm on Josh's show, I'm going to be my best for his show and for his audience. And if I start getting insecure about my answers, I'm no longer in Josh's show. I'm now in the James Robbins show, which sometimes is not the best show to be in. So
All right, cool. Really helpful. I appreciate that too. So I think what we get wrapped up, well, yeah, I would just echo the wise reflection too, because that's how we have to have kind of feedback. And one of the best ways to start, of course, is with ourselves. I mean, a lot of times we're our own worst critic, but a lot of times it's easier to take feedback from ourselves than other people too. I guess we can reach out to others, but when I think about doing that, I think, oh, am I going to burden them? What if they don't want to spend their precious time, giving me feedback? Or then what if I can't take the feedback too, or something like that? So these are other things, but I do think this wise reflection, and that goes with almost every area of life, from how we're relating to others, our ethical stance, yeah, how we're moving and speaking in the world on a daily basis. How we are when things don't go our way is a huge one, of any kind of spiritual practice. So yeah, wise reflection is utmost importance for sure. And I like that one goal, making it manageable and just putting all the energy into just that one goal, and it really can kind of amplify the effectiveness, I think, just doing one thing each time. So it's already enough stuff going on, right? So I think that's really wise advice too. So I want to loop back to where I think started from before we start wrapping up here. Where do you see, going back to leadership, where do you see kind of like, I don't know, like leadership trends or things happening in this space? Where do you see them going? And then, I mean, with that, what do you agree with, and what would you like to change course? And I guess maybe talking about things you see in your own work, and then maybe things you see on a wider societal scale that you can just speculate on, or just, from what you see in your studies and talking to people too outside of your own personal work.
I think leaders are only going to get better. In fact, they have no excuse to get better now, especially with AI coming online, right? Where any manager can basically start using AI to let AI know this is my team, this is their Gallup scores, this is their MBTI, and here's what I'm trying to do. Like AI can really be this running mate with you to guide you as you lead. Now, I I still think you're going to need human leaders. I I will sometimes have AI say, "Hey, you're my boss for the day. Tell me what I should be doing." It's nice to have that, but I'm not going to that's me, telling it to be my boss. It'd be another thing if someone told me AI was my boss. I think most people are going to push back on that. Although AI could be better bosses for than a lot of leaders out there. But AI leaders are going to be able to tap in more and more to that. Like, how do I have this conversation with this person? It's going to give you some great things. Where we're going in our company is we are, even though we still teach skills, to me, that's like the top of the iceberg. The bottom of the iceberg is you as a person, right? How you show up, being authentic, regulating your nervous system, all those good things, being in alignment. So we're starting to add that to our whole process, that it's not just about learning how to have a difficult conversation. It's also helping the leader go, well, why is this conversation so difficult for me? What are the things that triggered me from the past? What are the stories I'm telling myself so I can create new stories? Because if this conversation is triggering me, I'm probably getting triggered at home. I'm probably getting triggered, at the gas station. And so let me evolve as a human being. Then obviously I will bring better things to work. So that's where we're going with it. And I think leaders overall are going to have some good help, I think, with AI.
Well, let me throw I guess, more challenging question here. Some people, I think, aren't as optimistic about AI, and I don't want to get into fear mongering here. And I use it myself. It cuts down a lot of time that I have to spend on things, and it's you know the pros and cons, so weighing the pros and cons. But there are some people that are really saying that it's already happened, replacing certain jobs. So where I guess the way to frame this is, how can I guess the human element make sure that they're not replaceable by AI, because of all these kind of warnings we have that AI and then AI driven robotics are going to replace so many different jobs and things like this. Do you see this happening? Do you want to prepare for it? Do you want to try to prevent it? What's your outlook and view on this?
Yeah, overall, I'm an optimistic guy, but there are times I go down the AI rabbit hole and I start researching and hearing what's coming out. And I can't help but have sometimes a dark, gloomy feeling and the question, what have we done? Because I think there are challenges that it's just going to, legislation will just be behind, like catching up. Like, I think there's going to be a lot of damage done. So, from a leadership perspective, I hold to what I said earlier, where I think leaders can use it, but they're still going to want to motivate their staff, right? If you need humans doing the work, they're going to want a human boss. At least that's how I think. But as things start to get more and more replaced by I don't know. I feel nervous at times for my kids when I think about them and the fields they're going into. I got a daughter that wants to become a therapist, and that field is getting hit for sure. Do you want to encourage your kid to go into law school right now? I don't know. I think that sector is going to get hit big. I already use a lawyer less because I have AI to get me some quick answers. Now, it can't do everything, but again, we're talking AI today. What's AI in 3 years? And how much better is it? So I do worry for my kids. And I do worry my son was taking computer science in college. And then he was like, Dad, what am I doing? Like, they don't even teach AI. And how good is a coding degree going to be when there's all these coders out of work that will be more in line? So I hear you on that. I think there are some things I'm nervous about. And we live in a country where, especially if you're a publicly trading company, people don't think about the staff first. They just think about the quarterly returns, right? The quarterly numbers, and they're going to do whatever. But I'm hoping for business owners, like in January of this year, I had a meeting with my team and I said, that a lot of what you guys do could be replaced by AI. Now, I'm not going to replace you with AI, but I'm going to ask you to go learn AI so you can bring more value. And I think that's the key, right? It's like, especially if you have some good people working with you, which I do, then all right, I want them to level up their skills. Because I also told them, like, a lot of stuff what you guys do is you're going to find it hard to get work. So I need you to go out and level up on what you can bring to the company because I want you to stay. I hope a lot of business owners can think in that same way, right? Not just how can I maximize profit? How can I cut all these staff and have AI do it? I'll keep your staff, but then get them to learn AI so that now it might mean that I hire less in the future, probably will hire less in the future. So it'll be interesting to watch how this all plays out. To your question, should we try to stop this? I think that's pretty difficult when you've got companies in these not just companies, countries in an arms race, right? It's almost like back to the 60s of like, let's get a person to the moon. I mean, the reason we don't have someone on Mars is because there's no geopolitical pressure to get someone on Mars, or we would have had someone on Mars by now. But to get to the moon, it was like the space race. We got to win this. So now it's the AI race. So I think people are gonna just build these. Who knows what we're building, but we're building something.
Well, we're building a lot of data centers, is what I shouldn't say we, but a lot of data centers are supposedly being built in this Golden Dome program, I think, too. And so, yeah, I don't think really this is the space to get into it, but I think you addressed that really well. And none of us really, I can know the future, right? Until it gets here, there's things we can prepare for and steps we can take. And then, kind of however our values and ideologies guide us through these things too. Yeah, it reminds me of when I was working in online marketing. I think it was around the turn of the century. I'm showing my age here. And I think one of the programmers we had there, I think when he was going through training in school, I think I asked him something like, if you could develop a program that would replace your own job, would you do it? One of these hiring questions or something. I think it's a great question. I don't need to really go into how it should be answered or not be answered, but I just throw that out there. So I think with that, I think we got to start wrapping up. Tell people how they can get in touch with you, how they can work with you. What kind of things you have going on. I know you have a new book out, and we touched a little bit on the themes already. So tell people about that, and anything else you want to draw people's attention to before taking us out on a final message, us the listeners.
For sure. Yeah, my new book just came out. It's called The Call to Climb. It's actually a motivational fable about what do you do when you feel like maybe you're on the wrong path in your life. Like maybe what you're doing now isn't what you're supposed to be doing. And you feel inside like there's something bigger for you to do, but you're not sure what. And at the same time, leaving what you're doing would seem so scary in a lot of ways. And so it's really a story about that. And it's set in the Bolivian Andes. Obviously, you can see where that came from. That was published by Wiley. So that just came out. But if you want to know more about that, you would go to the website iwillclimb.com, iwillclimb.com. You can find out more about me and my leadership work there. So
Very cool, James. And it reminds me of my brother who runs a landscaping company. He tells his employees, American, not Americant, right? American. So it was a really good story that kept repeating in your life until you just finally said, okay, I'm going to do this thing. So, James, thanks so much for joining me here today. I really appreciate it. Um, and usually I say, taking us all out, may all beings everywhere find their optimal motivation and purpose for doing what they're doing, and for now and into the future. Bye now.
thanks, Josh.